In a new war crime against civilians, Houthi rebels attacked displaced people camp with ballistic missile in Ma'rib. The United Nations Development Programme chief says the number of people dying from indirect effects of the war outweighs those killed in front lines. The P5 countries affirmed that Yemenis to denounce violence and start political talks. Welcome to Yemen Today TV. This is the English news with me, Rana Sweda. Starting from Ma'rib, Houthi militia targeted a displacement camp run by the International Organization of Migration with 2 ballistic missiles, leaving several civilian casualties. The executive unit for the administration of IDPs camps in Ma'rib Governorate stated that Houthi militia targeted Al Hamma camp, which hosts around 264 displaced families, noting that there were injured women and children. The United Nations Development Programme chief, Achim Steiner, said that in Yemen more people die from indirect effects of the conflict than being killed on battlefronts. The UN's official indicated that Yemen, since the beginning of the conflict, 80% of the population depends on humanitarian assistance and over 12.1 million are in dire need for food. He added that a whole generation of youth is destroyed due to the collapse of the institutions, stressing that the crisis may even extend beyond conflicts. The permanent 5 heads of missions called on all parties of the conflict to immediately de-escalate military activities and revive peace talks under the United Nations auspices. In their statement, the heads of missions reiterated their support to peace efforts led by the UN envoy Hans Grunberg, while stressing that there is no military solution to the crisis. They also welcomed the reshuffling of the Central Bank Board of Directors, wishing success for the newly appointed members. The conflict in Yemen has entered its 7th year, yet it doesn't seem to end, despite the regional and international efforts to resolve it. However, nobody can deny the role of regional forces in igniting the war. In other words, Yemen has become a proxy war between Tehran and Riyadh. More on this story is within this report.
The war in Yemen intensified over the past months as tit-for-tat attacks were reported between Iran-aligned Houthis and Saudi-led coalition. The crisis in Yemen first escalated when Houthis took control of large areas in 2014, allegedly with the backing from Tehran, Riyadh's regional foe. The Saudis entered the arena a year later to make sure a friendly government was in power in the neighborhood. But the events inadvertently made Yemen yet another proxy battleground between Tehran and Riyadh. More than 230,000 Yemenis have died in the war, including women and children. But Saudis and Iranians are nowhere close to understanding that could end the conflict and the bloodshed. Saudis and Iranians too came to talking table this April in Baghdad and at length discussed Yemen, but no headway yet been made. Oil-rich Ma'rib in Yemen is deeply contested and is key to resolution. It once fulfilled 40% of Yemen's electricity needs and provided cooking gas to 29 million people. 120 kilometers east of Sana'a, is flooded with oil and brimming with gas fields, a place of interest for global energy giants with the potential for massive investment. It has emerged as the biggest prize that the Houthi rebels hope to secure and later use as leverage on the negotiating table. Ahmad Awad bin Mubarak said that the fall of Ma'rib will mark the end of the political and peace process in Yemen. The peace efforts initiated by the United Nations have foundered in the long civil war in Yemen, and neither Saudis nor Iran-backed Houthis seem willing to back down. The failure of the Iranian project in Yemen will ensure the failure of the Iranian project and the entire region. In the end, Yemen is strategically located on a strait through which much of the world's oil and other shipments across, and an escalation of the conflict in Yemen should worry us and the entire world.
The International Committee to Protect Journalists said that Yemen's non-state judicial systems spell death and torture for journalists. This came within a recent study published by the committee, which said that Yemen offers an example of the implications for journalists when non-state groups establish not only security forces and prisons, but also courts and legal proceedings. The study indicated that crimes against journalists continue with non-state actors known for violence, filling the gaps left by a crumbling state. The Yemeni Teachers Syndicate said that international indifference is the main reason behind the increase in assassinations against educational cadres in Yemen. The union spokesman said failure to investigate these crimes, silence of the international community, and impunity encourage crime doers. The union spokesman called for impartial and transparent local investigations into these assassinations. He also called for an international investigation and legal prosecution of those involved, as these crimes are carried out with complete impunity. The United States Agency for Development warned that more than 8 million school-aged children are at risk of dropping out of education. The agency said that the war and the outbreak of the coronavirus in Yemen has affected a lot of children, adding that it registered 23,585 children in non-formal or rehabilitation programs. The United Nations Children's Fund said it needs more than $480 million to fund its urgent humanitarian response plan. It added that these funds will serve the needs of 11.3 million Yemeni children over the next year. According to UNICEF, about 400,000 Yemeni children are suffering from severe acute malnutrition. 1.7 million children are internally displaced. More than 2 million children are out of school, and about 8.5 million children do not have access to safe water. The Norwegian Refugee Council has stated that millions of Yemeni families have started to cut down the number of their daily meals due to high prices. This has made people suffer severely from malnutrition. The council went further, saying that a mass famine could break out in Yemen nationwide. The following report has more details.
Yemen's skyrocketing inflation is driving families to further cut down on their meals, edging them closer to starvation and malnutrition. The indirect consequences of the conflict are seen in economic hardship, health, and malnutrition. Over half the population in Yemen is going hungry, and acute cases of malnutrition for children under 5 is at the highest ever recorded. The Norwegian Refugee Council, which is an independent humanitarian organization that helps people who are forced to flee, issued a survey stating that the escalating inflation in Yemen is pushing millions of families to further reduce the number of their daily meals due to high prices, bringing them closer to hunger and poverty. According to the United Nations, the survey found that almost 1 out of every 2 families who were already vulnerable had recently reduced the number of daily meals because they could no longer afford them. People complained that they couldn't afford to buy meat, chicken, fruit, milk, or rice because of the rising costs. The 50 kilograms bag of flour used to cost 8,000 or 7,000 riyals only. Now it costs 35,000 riyals, which is a huge difference. 7 years ago, Yemen's domestic currency traded at 215 Yemeni riyals against the US dollar. By early December 2021, riyal traded for 1,700 riyals against US dollars due to the inflation that has been going on in the country for so long now. At the 7-year mark of its civil war, Yemen is the world's worst humanitarian catastrophe. It is a political emergency as well as a humanitarian one. Now is the time for a dual approach: funding to prevent famine and save lives, and diplomacy to end the war. Children have been going to bed hungry, and now they have even less food than the little they had before. We need more aid funding to help them urgently. Governments, donors, and international financial institutions need to ensure an economic rescue package to avert famine.
Turning to Taiz, the joint forces liberated Jabal Qubna and took control of Houthi customs in Sakm, north of Maqbara district. The official spokesman for the joint brigades, Colonel Ma'moon al-Mahjami, said that the joint forces controlled the mountain range overlooking Sakm customs in Shamir. The joint forces took up fierce clashes with the rebels, inflicting heavy losses among them. To Hodeidah, the joint forces arrested a Houthi militia spying cell in Al-Khoukha. The military media of the joint forces reported that the General Intelligence Division of the National Resistance captured 3 of the spying cells: Badri Mansour, Nabil Hassan, and Yasser Saeed. All were prominent leaders of the cell. The militia media indicated that confessions confirmed their involvement with Houthi militia, including transmitting coordinates and locations of the joint forces and Coast Guard brigades in the Red Sea sector. Still in Hodeidah, a citizen was killed and another was injured in a Houthi mine explosion in Hais. According to the Yemeni Landmine Observatory, Murad Abdel Qutbi was killed as a result of the explosion of a mine planted by Houthis, and Yusuf Ahmed was seriously injured. Both were in Hais. Turning to Ma'rib, a military expert affiliated with Lebanese Hezbollah was killed in Umrish front. Military sources said that Akram al-Sayed, an expert affiliated with Hezbollah, was killed along with a number of militia members. Minister of Information Muammar al-Iryani said that the death of an expert and leader of the military wing of the Lebanese Hezbollah is a strong blow to the Tehran regime and its sectarian militias. Still in Ma'rib, where government forces defeated a major attack led by Houthis after a 50-hour battle that targeted eastern Balkh Heights in the southern fronts. Military sources denied Houthi militias' claims that it had controlled eastern Balkh Heights. Same sources confirmed that groups of the militia infiltrated the outskirts of the mountain range, and after 50 hours of fierce battles, the government forces thwarted the militias' attacks. Meanwhile, the military media reported that government forces' artillery killed 20 Houthi elements and destroyed 11 other military vehicles. Coming next. International Anti-Corruption Day amid accusations against the government being not transparent.
راتب الواحد 120 ألف، والكيس الدقيق ب18 ألف، والكيس السكر اليوم ب20 ألف. كم يعني بيعطي هذا الراتب كامل كيس سكر وكيس دقيق؟
المواطن اليمني يعيش في أزمة إنسانية وغذائية مؤلمة من غلاء الأسعار وفحشة الأسعار وغلاء الصرف والعملة الأجنبية في البلد.
حالتي الحين حالة لما ندفناش القيلة ما نقدرش ناكل الأكل داخل، ما احنا بحاجة صعبة.
Welcome back. The world commemorates the International Anti-Corruption Day today, while states' institutions are not functioning properly. Local and international experts are skeptical over the government performance and say it lacks transparency. More on this story is within the following report.
The International Anti-Corruption Day is observed globally on the 9th of December to raise awareness about corruption and the ways to combat this global ill. The day seeks to highlight the role of every part of society, individuals, NGOs, law enforcement, governments and media persons in tackling the issue of corruption. According to the United Nations, corruption has become a global phenomenon that no country is immune to, noting that the global cost of corruption is about 5% of the world's gross domestic product, or $2.6 trillion. Preventing corruption is important for society, as it will help people secure better access to healthcare and other essential services, while promoting stable democratic institutions. In war-torn Yemen, corruption prevailed and reached most of the state's institutions. Health is school, war, regional, racial, demographical, and political discrimination all culminated in the high rise of corruption. Yemen's current non-state judicial systems spell all types of corruption. The most affected is the poor Yemeni citizen, who suffers from the worst humanitarian crisis, according to international reports. With the current international agreements and efforts to end the conflict in Yemen, and with closing points of views between various political factions, international donors continue calling on the government to take actual measures to combat corruption as a condition for providing more support. Features of rebuilding state institutions began to flourish amid high hopes within Yemenis. Years after the lack of accountability and the spread of corruption, Yemen replaced central bank governor, deputy governor and board of directors. Also, the government assigned Central Organization for Control and Accountability to review previous boards' work since its transfer to Aden at the end of 2016 until 2021. This constitutes a point of light in the dark tunnel of corruption that spread in most state institutions. It also opens the way to tackle actual steps to relaunch government agencies' performance to serve Yemeni people. Experts believe that the first action to tackle corruption that prevailed in all governmental agencies comes through the reformation of the Supreme National Anti-Corruption Commission by members recognized for their integrity and efficiency. Yemenis hope that activating Central Organization for Oversight and Accountability, rehabilitating institutional work and rule of law, and adhering to standards for occupying public office, away from favoritism and partisan sharing, would tackle corruption and elevate their suffering amid this ugly war.
In southern and eastern Yemen, angry rallies denounced continued deterioration of living conditions, collapse of national currency, and absence of government role to the economic crisis. Local sources said that citizens in Sheikh Osman district, Aden, denounced continued rise in prices and worsening economic situation. Meanwhile, in Hadramaut, citizens protested in Al-Shihr against the current crumbling economic conditions after the increase in prices. Protesters called on the government to stop this accelerating collapse of the national currency and to improve the living and service situation. Two Al-Dala wholesale stores closed their doors in protest against the new pricing of foodstuffs announced by the Chamber of Commerce. Sources said that merchants closed their stores as previous stock commodities had run out, and those currently in their stores had been provided at high prices, and selling them at the advertised price will make them lose. Sources confirmed that wholesalers are hiding large quantities of wheat, flour, rice, sugar and oil. This was met with condemnations calling on authorities to compel merchants to open their stores according to regulations and laws. The reshuffling of the Central Bank Board has been received well locally and internationally, yet the bottom line remains. Such a step can have a tangible impact on people who have been suffering a lot due to high prices. The following report has more details.
War-torn Yemen is witnessing a sharp deterioration in the value of its real currency, recording 1,700 to the dollar, while the central bank maintains an official rate of 530 rials to the dollar. The Yemeni president has reshuffled the administrative board of the country's central bank and appointed a new governor. Yemeni economic analysts are optimistic about the new administration. They added that for the new governor to succeed, he must be fully supported by the coalition and the international donors. An urgent new cash injection is a must at this critical time. This will help the new administration of the bank to form new reserves of foreign currency and recontrol the banking market. The Yemeni rial has significantly lost ground against foreign currencies, reaching new lows this week. The $1 US was trading at 1,650 rials according to exchange companies in Aden. The devaluation of the local currency has left millions of Yemenis starving, as the majority of the population can no longer afford basic commodities, with foreign currency reserves at the central bank almost exhausted. Eventually, millions of Yemenis whose lives have been crushed by the conflict hope the new central bank board can make tangible progress and lift them from the verge of collapse.
The National Committee Against Coronavirus announced no new cases of the COVID-19. Committee officials said on Twitter that 8 recovered cases were recorded and 1 death. With the current updates, the total confirmed cases are 10,047, including 1,957 deaths and 6,936 cases of recovery. Here's a reminder of the main headlines. In a new war crime against civilians, Houthi rebels attacked displaced people camp with ballistic missile in Ma'rib. The United Nations Development Programme chief says the number of people dying from indirect effects of the war outweighs those killed in front lines. The P5 countries affirm that Yemenis to denounce violence and start political talks. This is the end of the news. Thank you for watching. See you soon.